Investment properties are great. You can use them to build wealth, to produce income, and yes, even to retire early. But it's also easy to make some big, expensive mistakes. I'm talking thousands and maybe tens of thousands of dollars, especially when you're buying a property. So in this video, I've dug back to 18 years of my own experience buying investment properties and owning 100 rental properties today to find my top 5 mistakes that I've made when I'm buying properties. My hope is that you can learn from these and hopefully not make the same mistakes I did, or at least not to the extent I did. So if you like this topic, please give me a thumbs up, hit the like button, and we're getting started right now. Hey, welcome to Coach Carson TV. My name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a channel all about investing in real estate, achieving financial independence, and doing more of what matters. I publish new videos every single Friday morning, so be sure to hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you don't miss anything. So let's jump right into the top 5 mistakes with mistake number 1 that I've made buying investment properties, and it's this: underestimating repair cost. So let me give you a little secret about buying investment properties. This is actually not so secret, is that very rarely will you have a property with 0 in repair cost. It doesn't happen that often. Now, yes, there are cases, or I bought a property that's a new construction rental. So we bought it from a builder, we're renting it out. Clearly, there's not that many repairs when you have a new construction property. Some of you might buy turnkey properties where a remodeler has completely fixed the property up and now you're getting it back. Most of the time there's no repairs there, but most of the good deals you're gonna get out there have some kind of problem. There's something wrong with them that a traditional buyer doesn't want, and then you solve that problem by doing some of the work. Sometimes it's cosmetic, sometimes it's more involved, and really depending on what your expertise is as an investor will be depending on what kinds of properties you actually buy. But very rarely is it going to be 0 or a low cost. So that's the mistake. I've had properties, especially early on in my career, but I'm embarrassed to say a little bit, even later in my career, sometimes I relapse to underestimating repair costs. Now, what is the solution to not doing that? Part of it is building your own expertise. It's just a skill, just like anything, like building a muscle is evaluating a property and kind of looking at all the systems of a property and understanding what needs to be done, what needs to be repairs, and how much that's gonna cost. I'm gonna give you one recommendation that you can, some kind of textbook reading offline here, is to buy a book by my friend Jay Scott. It's published by Bigger Pockets and it's called The Book on Estimating Remodel Cost. It's just one of those you need to have on your shelf. If you want to be good as an investor, if you want to study that, even if you're hiring other people to do the work, it's good to be able to make a list called a scope of work and be able to understand what's being done and how much each one costs. You can also use YouTube, of course, but the point is you need to educate yourself, learn how to evaluate it. The second piece though, and this is whether you're brand new or an expert, I think you should get help from a team of people. And so my team typically involves a property manager who can look at the property. If I'm gonna be renting it out particularly, they're gonna look at the property and help me understand what needs to be done so that my tenant can move into the property, be happy, and pay the market rent for the property. So they're gonna look at it from somewhat of a cosmetic standpoint, from the tenant's point of view, saying, hey, this carpet's really bad, or this has this smell in the property, or this, these appliance set is not typical for what we're renting for this price. And so they're gonna give you a list of things that they think need to be done. So that's one piece of the puzzle. But then you need to have another team member who is a property inspector. So they're kind of looking at it from a different lens. They have two different ways of analyzing a property. A property inspector typically goes at every part of the property, the attic, the crawl space if there is one, or the basement. They check all the outlets. They're looking for everything in the property from a condition standpoint to tell you, is it working, is it not working? Or do they see a red flag, a problem? Is there some rotten wood at some place that needs to be fixed? Your property manager may or may not find that. So between those two, you're sort of going through all that and then also looking at yourself to figure out what needs to be done. And then a third team member is a contractor or a team of subcontractors who can give you estimates for what those costs are. Now, is this an involved process? Typically it is, and you might do it when you're making an offer on a property. You might do kind of a light version of that, and then once you get a property under contract and have a due diligence period, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, you'll do a more involved process. But the point is, this is one of the biggest mistakes, and so you need to do some homework, you need to get educated, you need to have a team around you to help you not underestimate repair costs. Mistake number 2 that I've made in buying investment properties over the last 18 years is letting my emotions get carried away when bidding on a property in a competitive situation. So you might have been in this situation yourself before where you go to an auction, or maybe you're bidding on a property that's in a competitive situation with multiple bidders and you get a little bit carried away. Well, that happened to me back in 2007. So I started investing in 2003. So it's about 4 years later. We were very busy. We were buying lots of properties. It's kind of towards the end of 2007 when things were starting to get a little dicey in the market. Kind of, you could tell things were starting to go downhill, but we were still buying. We thought things were okay. And I actually went to a bankruptcy auction. I found this multi-unit property, and the owner of the property, I had never run into this situation before, but was losing the property, or filed bankruptcy, Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which means everything was being liquidated. He was losing all his property. I felt bad for him, so I kind of had some sympathy going on for the person who owned it. I showed up at the auction, and there's also another investor who kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, was trying to be, just competitive and saying some things that I didn't like. So I had kind of the sympathy thing going on. I had the little anger, kind of competitive nature. I used to play football, so hey, I'm getting competitive here now. And just being busy as well. So I'm just gonna give you that as a backdrop on all of this. You might kind of foreshadow what's going on here. Well, I got the auction. It's also in a courtroom, so you feel like the gravity of a courtroom, and there's a judge up there, who's the bankruptcy judge, and they finally get the moment when we're bidding on the property. My heart's beating, and I started bidding, and I thought I remembered what number I wanted, but then in the heat of the moment, I kept on going. The other guy kept on bidding. The guy who I was competitive with kept bidding, and I kept bidding. I went above my number, and I kept on going, and finally he stopped bidding. All of a sudden, I was the last bidder. I won this property, and I think I was probably $20,000 or $30,000 above what my anticipated number was, but I was hoping to buy the property for. Well, that was kind of interesting, right? I had let my emotions get carried away. The gravity of the courtroom, the competitiveness, feeling sympathetic for this person, all of that took me away from making an objective decision. So my mistake was paying too much for a property. And I'll give you a sneak peek of the end story. We worked it out. We bought the property. It was a long road, 2007, 8, and 9. We eventually sold it, made a little bit of money on the property. So it all ended up okay, but it was a pretty stressful situation buying this property, overbidding for it, talking to my business partner about it. It was a mistake. And so my mistake was, if I had to go back and I had to give a recommendation to you, whether you're in an auction or a competitive situation, here is the most important lesson I took away. When you go to an auction, have a written price that you stick to. No matter what, you make the decision in your office or at home when you have no emotion going on whatsoever, that's your number. Whatever your number is, you stick to it. If somebody goes $1 over that number, you don't go over that number. That's the rule of auctions. And if you can't handle that, if you get so hyped up and excited about it, have somebody else bid for you. Have your spouse, have a partner, have a friend, pay somebody to do it if you have to. But if you get carried away in an auction environment, you're not going to make a good investment decision. You're going to overpay. You're going to overlook details that are important to pay attention to. Mistake number 3 that I've made in buying investment properties is not properly understanding the contract that I'm using to buy a property. And more particularly, not understanding a section of the contract, which is called the default clause, which in my understanding means the part of the contract that says what happens if you don't do as you promised, if you don't follow through, either as a buyer or a seller. So I want to take you back to that story where I bought a property at the bankruptcy auction. And I got emotional and I overbid for it. As soon as that was done, I had to go and meet with the person who said, congratulations, you're now going to be buying this property. Let's sign this contract right now. And I was told ahead of time, terms of the bid, I had to come up with a deposit. So I sat there hoping to read the contract right there in the hallway of this bankruptcy court. But I was a little bit more familiar with some other auctions I'd been to, a foreclosure auction in our state. And my understanding of those other contracts that I was more familiar with was you put a deposit down. It was sometimes a significant deposit, like a 5% deposit. So if you're buying a property for $100,000, you might have to come up with $5,000 or maybe $2,500. So you have to come up with some money right up front that's non-refundable. But in those other situations, you could walk away from that money. And so they would just keep the money. There was no recourse beyond that. Well, I was sort of in the back of my mind thinking that was the same thing with this, but there's a lot of details in a contract, right? And if you're not an attorney, if you don't know how to read this, do you really understand what you're signing, what the implications are? Well, in this particular situation, give it a week or two, we started realizing we had bought a lot of properties, and this was not the best property for us to buy at that time. We just decided, let's just walk away from our money, which I think was about $5,000 at that time. Sounds kind of crazy to walk away from 5,000 bucks, but we had other properties we were making money on. Kind of storm clouds were on the horizon for the Great Recession. We just wanted to walk away from it, move on. We'll just cut our losses. Well, guess what? When we told the bankruptcy representative that we wanted to do that, they said, no, actually, you're not going to do that because we will sue you to make sure you buy this property. So bankruptcy court is going to sue you. Here I am in my 20s, young investor. I got a little panicked. That's a little scary. And ultimately, we bought the property. We figured out how to get the money and buy it. So the mistake was I didn't understand what I was signing. Now this can apply to purchase agreements, can apply to insurance contracts. There are all sorts of legal instruments you sign out there. So another team member you need to have on your side is a real estate attorney who can look over that contract. And sometimes it could take them 15 minutes. Hey, will you look at this default clause and help me understand, am I on the hook here? How am I on the hook? Understand what you're signing. And there's another little clause that you often use as an investor called a due diligence clause. So you also want your attorney in whatever state you're in, because it varies from state to state what you can and can't do with this, is to have a clause called a due diligence clause that allows you a period of time to inspect the property. If you're buying a rental property with tenants in it, to inspect the tenants, inspect the books of the owner, all sorts of things that you want to know before you buy a property. And in most cases, you can get out of the contract during that due diligence clause and even get your earnest money back. In some cases you might have to put a little bit of money that you would lose if you walked away, but there would be no recourse beyond that. So my mistake, not understanding my contract. Don't make that mistake yourself. Build a team, have an attorney on your side, understand the contracts that you're signing. The fourth mistake that I've made over the last 18 years buying investment properties is buying a property that had a title problem. So if you don't know what title means, when you go to a closing to buy a property, there's a specialized contract called a deed. There's all sorts of different kinds of deeds. You can study up on that if you like to understand more the legal side of it. But usually the seller gives you this contract called a deed that gives you ownership of the property. It gets recorded in the public records, and that's how you own the property. But there's a lot more details to that. And there's something called a legal description, which is a little bit more than the address of your property. You know, your address is described as 123 Main Street or something. Well, the legal description is what a surveyor or an attorney uses to understand what it is you're buying. So you're buying this property that has a certain shape. The lot lines are a certain way, has a certain space that it takes up. And so when you get a deed, you actually want to understand what you are buying. So the mistake we made is we got all the way to sell a rental property about a year ago. And we had bought this property many years before. We had rented it for years, but when we went to sell it, we got a week before the closing. I got a call from the closing attorney. In our state, we use attorneys to close the property. Some states use title companies. Well, this closing attorney called me and said, hey, Mr. Carson, we've got a problem. It appears that there's an issue with the legal description in the deed that you'll be transferring. You can't transfer a clear title or marketable title to your buyer. And so we can't close. I say, what do you mean we didn't close clear title? I had an attorney who, when I bought the property, and they did a title search too, well, it turns out they missed an issue. That several buyers before me, that there was a few buyers before me, the neighbors had kind of traded a little bit of land. They'd cut off 10 feet on the front and given that to the neighbor, and then in exchange they got 10 feet on the back. And so they essentially resurveyed the property from the original shape of the property. And somewhere along the way, my property, the owner did not include that in their legal description. Their attorney didn't. My attorney didn't catch this. And luckily for me, and here's one of the lessons from this, I did get title insurance. So this is a type of insurance that protects you in a worst case scenario if you can't transfer a property to somebody else. And if they did a proper title search at the time you bought the property, then they'll protect you and at least pay for your loss in that case. So I had title insurance. That was a good thing. But why didn't my closing attorney catch that? That was a little bit frustrating. So getting an attorney with a really good reputation who pays attention to the details, even if you get title insurance, this situation, I lost my buyer. They went away. It took me a lot of time, a lot of effort. I had to track down multiple owners along with the help of an attorney, paying an attorney to do this, to find a person who would sign and help me correct that deed a couple owners before me. So long story short, I was lucky and was able to solve that. The people were willing to work with me, but I lost my buyer. We put it back on the market and eventually got it sold. But a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and some time and money to get this solved. How could I have solved that to kind of give myself a double insurance at the very beginning? Even if my attorney is screwed up, I could have gotten a survey on that property at the very beginning. If I would have hired a surveyor, probably would have cost me $400, $350, I don't know, something like that. If they would have done a survey, they would have caught that in the very beginning, even if my attorney missed that. So that's a step. I have not always got a survey on a property. Sometimes in neighborhoods, I'm like, oh, that looks pretty clear. But you should at least, if you understand how to walk the property lines and look at a legal description, then great, you can do that on your own. If you're new and you don't understand that at all, which most of us fall into that category, hire a surveyor to mark off the lines, to resurvey that property for you, to make sure there's no issues with the property lines, with the legal description, and you can avoid a situation like I had. That doesn't happen every day, but it is a mistake. It is a problem that you want to avoid, and you can help yourself by getting title insurance, hiring a surveyor, and of course, getting a closing attorney who has a good reputation and who will pay attention to that kind of detail. The fifth big mistake that I have made over the last 18 years buying investment properties is underestimating some negative qualities of a property, either the building or the lot itself, and how that might affect the price and the marketability of that property. Now, let me explain what I mean with a couple of examples. We bought a property that was a nice house. It was in a good location, had a nice backyard, good layout inside. There was only one problem, and we didn't identify this before we bought the property, was the next door neighbor had some pretty vicious dogs. And I don't know if they really will bite you, but they would run up to the fence, they would jump up on the fence. There's a couple of them, they're big, they're intimidating, they barked every time you walked in the backyard. Well, they didn't happen to be there whenever we bought the property. The one time we went out there before we put it under contract, and the one time we went to inspect it before we bought it, they weren't there. Well, guess what? When we went to go rent the property, those dogs were there, and it made it very difficult to market the property, to get it rented. And guess what the other problem with that was? We have no control over that as an investor. They are within their rights. Depending on the city you're in, the town you're in, there might be some ordinances, but in most cases, that's their backyard. They can do whatever they want, but it definitely affects our ability to buy the property. Let me give you another example. We bought a house that was on a very busy road. Again, the general location was pretty good. We liked the property. We felt like the price was pretty good because it was lower than a lot of the other properties in the area. We bought it with a good discount. The problem was it was on such a busy road that some of the houses that we used as comparables were more in a quiet neighborhood, and we knew it was not quite as valuable as those, but how much lower should we go to discount it enough that somebody won't think the really busy road is an issue? So if a family buys the property and they're nervous that their kid's gonna run out there and get hit by a car, that's like the worst fear of a parent. And it ends up, this was a flip house. We were buying it, fixing it, and flipping it. It took us a lot longer to sell it. We had to drop the price lower than what we thought it was gonna be. It was just difficult to market the property and figure out what the value was. So those are just two examples of many of sometimes little things, but they affect the value of the property. And they're not the big stuff that you usually look at, the square footage of the house, and does this have good curb appeal, does it look nice from the outside? Those are pretty normal. You're probably gonna pick up on these, but I actually have a list, and you can get a copy of this list if you want. Look in the description below. I have a free toolkit that includes a deal worksheet that has a list of what I call the house desirability checklist. So just things that I've made mistakes on, like the busy road, like the dogs in the backyard, like being near a factory that has a smell that comes over all the time. So just a list of things you might want to check on multiple times when you're buying a property, because it can be a big mistake. It can reduce the rent you can get, make it harder to rent it or sell it, and just make it not as attractive of an investment. And like anything else in life, you just gotta have a checklist to make sure you're covering everything and you can learn from other people. So look below. I also have a link probably above to a link that you can click on to get that checklist. And it'll be something that you can use on your future properties to make sure you don't make the same mistake I did. So now you've heard my top 5 mistakes that I've made. I've got to tell you, I've made many more other mistakes as well. So if you're an investor who's also made mistakes, don't worry, that's part of the game. We're all going to make mistakes, but your goal is really to mitigate and reduce the big ones, the ones that can really hurt you, the ones that you don't have any control over. And hopefully the tips I've given you have been helpful. Let me know in the comments below if you like these tips, if the mistakes that I've made or something that can help you. Are there any other mistakes that I missed that you could share with other people? It'd be nice to have a collection of ideas that will help other people to not make mistakes. And remember, with most of these, if you do a due diligence ahead of time, so if you have a checklist like I've given you here, if you know what to look out for, and you take your time, have some due diligence, you can usually cover most of the big things. And if you build a team around you who can help you look over your shoulder, don't do this alone. Have your inspector, have a good closing attorney, have a surveyor. Real estate's a team sport, and you can overcome most of the big mistakes just by having that checklist and building a team. If you like this video about understanding the real life mistakes of an investment property, I think you'll also like the next video, which is about should you get debt on an investment property. If you listen to some people like Dave Ramsey, they don't get any debt on any of their real estate. Other people say debt is a great thing, it's a tool. Which side do I fall on? And how do you make sure you don't make big mistakes with borrowing money? It actually is one of the big, if you do it wrong, could be one of the bigger mistakes. That's what I cover in this video. I give you some guidelines on how I think you can safely borrow and when it is a mistake to get certain kinds of debt and when it's not. So check out that video and let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching Coach Carson TV. My name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and I'll see you next time.